As I'm always telling you to read your Bible, and you know, of course, from the things I've said in the past, that the Bible has different levels of understanding. You could take today's gospel, for instance, and just think about it on the surface level, the literal approach, that Jesus calmed the physical waters on the Sea of Galilee. And I'm not disputing that. If you've ever been on Lake Michigan or even some of our inland lakes and a storm came up, you know the power of water and how scary that will be for whatever kind of vessel you're in. Think about the people down south now on the coast. They got 10 or 12 inches of rain. The power of water. Now that's the surface level. And what I'm going to talk about today is at least one level down, and you already know that, and I'm sure you're thinking about that, the storms of our lives. I'm not going to talk about the physical. The whole thing is centered around the inner storms. And all of us are in a vessel. Life is like being in a boat. We're moving from one side of the lake, birth, to the other side of the lake, which is our death and entrance into heaven. We're in this boat. And while we're in that boat of life, we go through storms. We go through transitions. I don't think anybody can get through this life without some storms. I don't know what storms you might be going through at the present moment, but you can add that in. Because it's also transitions. I'm not just talking about things going wrong. Transitions. From a youth to becoming an adult. From being single to be married. Moving from one job to another job. Especially if you've been unexpectedly terminated. Moving from one neighborhood to another neighborhood. Moving from being healthy to being sick. From being middle-aged to old age. Maybe becoming parents for the first time or the second time, or parents of a difficult child. Maybe your career is changing. They tell me now that in today's world, in the process of a person's life, you will probably change your career at least 3 or 4 times. No longer does somebody work in the same job for 40 years. Maybe you're moving from addiction, alcohol or drugs, into sobriety. Think about that as the storms of life. And we always remember the good old days. Why are they the good old days? Because we have forgotten the problems we had, and we only think of the fun we had in the good old days. I read a study this week about people who study stress. Do you know the 3 greatest stressors in life? Number 1 is the death of a spouse. The second great stressor is a divorce, and the third is separation. Do you ever notice that after one of those events in a person's life, many times they get sick? The stress just drives them down, and they start drowning in the stresses of life. Now, like the storm on the lake, many times storms come up unexpectedly. Any of the things I just mentioned could happen without even our thought that it might happen. And when that happens, because we're human, we want Jesus to intervene. Like the story, they wake up Jesus and say, do something. We do the same thing. We want to shake Jesus and say, do something. Now remember that Jesus, as the second person of the Trinity, the Son of God, had unlimited power. But when he took on a human form, Philippians 2, Jesus totally emptied himself of that divine power, and he took on the humanity of a human man, a human being, and he gave up all that power. He emptied himself. He took on our life. So Jesus, in a sense, cannot magically solve our problems, even though we want him to. We want him to be the fairy godfather on Father's Day with a magic wand. and take away all our problems? It does not happen that way. That's why I always go back to this book when bad things happen to good people. This book changed my life and my thinking. Because when in seminary, we were taught God controls everything. This book says God controls nothing. If you're familiar with Rabbi Kushner, he is a rabbi. He had a son that was, I think, 3 or 4 years old, and the son was diagnosed with rapid aging disease. By the time the son was 14, he died as an old man. And the rabbi said to God, "How did you let this happen? I never committed any big sins. I've been faithful. Why didn't you do something?" So he goes through weather. Who controls the weather? God doesn't. Who controls disease? Who controls who gets what? God doesn't. Who controls the day of our death? God doesn't. We die when we wear out, one way or another. So again, if you haven't read this, take a look at that. Now, our boat is this life. We have a tendency to focus on the storms. We don't realize that Jesus is with us in the storms, but we don't recognize him because he doesn't look and act like we think he should. I read a story this week about a woman close to her father. He suddenly died. She couldn't accept it. She used to talk to him every night. So, after he died, every night she texted him a message on his phone number. Every night. She couldn't let go. This is so touching to me. After 4 years, she got an answer. And the answer said, "My name is Brad. I got your father's old phone number, and I've been reading your texts for 4 years. And 4 years ago, my daughter died, and your text messages got me through it." He was the Jesus figure in the storm of her life. So if you're going through storms, look for the people close to you. They're your Jesus figure. Don't miss it. Could be a spouse or a child or a parent or a neighbor. They're the Jesus figure speaking to you. But the question is, are we listening? Are we listening?